Hey, welcome to episode 1 of this YouTube channel. And if you clicked on this already, I just want to say thank you for taking some time to jump on, see what it's all about, see if you even enjoy being here. And so I want to take just a couple minutes to let you know what this is even going to be about. What are we here for? What's the channel going to be about? And then in just a minute after I do that, I'm going to introduce some guests to you who are going to kind of kick this thing off for episode number 1. And so really the whole idea of this YouTube channel is to have people on, just kind of normal people, friends of mine, people that I know for the most part. So I'm not trying to get celebrities. I'm not trying to get, social media influencers. I'm not trying to, tell you about the next big best thing that you need to spend your money on, anything like that. I just want to get people on to talk about their stories. And the reason why, and we're going to talk about this with the guests that I have in just a couple of minutes, is that I think our stories are powerful. I think that when we can look back and kind of dissect and look through and kind of, I guess dissect is the word, right? Our stories, it can do something for us, and it can kind of help us to paint a picture of why we are where we are, and it can help us to kind of put together where we're going, and even look at some of the things about ourselves that we think are great, and some of the things that we think are maybe not so great, and give us some context for maybe where those things came from. And so that's really awesome. But I also think there's something really cool about hearing other people's stories, because the truth is, most people we know, they've been through a lot, and they've been through a lot that we don't even know about, right? And so when we get to sit and hear somebody else's story, we just get to know them better. But also when we see what people have gone through, and yet they're still pushing, right? They're still moving. They've still got goals. They still got dreams. They're still working towards something. They're still trying to do something worthwhile, right? Something creative, something fun, something that they consider meaningful and important, despite all the things that they've come through. Well, there's something really cool about that. There's something really inspiring about that. And me personally, it's hearing stories like that have helped me to think, you know what, maybe my story shouldn't stop me, but it should actually help propel me into the things that I want to do. Like this YouTube, right? This is one of those things, right? It's terrifying. I'm going to talk in a microphone and put it on, and people are going to look and watch it, and they're going to be able to tell me how stupid I sound, right? But I'm doing it. Why? Because I think I've seen other people jump on, do the same thing, and have success, right? And so getting to hear somebody else's story or see somebody else's story can actually help us and inspire us to do some pretty awesome things too. And so my hope is that you will enjoy the conversation today with our guests, and that you will click subscribe, and that you'll jump in the comments and you'll let me know what you think, and that you'll keep coming back as we keep producing more videos where we're just having some conversations with people about their stories. So with all that being said, let's go ahead and let's meet our guests. All right, well, hey, let me introduce these fine gentlemen to you guys again, because we just froze and now we're back, but you didn't know that, and now you do. So but hey, so first, this is my friend Noah Nickel, and Noah is the lead pastor of King's Church in Lakewood, Ohio. And one of the reasons I have Noah on here is just I love the way he thinks. And Noah, I don't know if you know this, but so you were one of the first people, probably the first person who ever had a conversation with me about doubt in a way that made like doubt not a bad word, not a bad thing. And one of the things that you said, and you probably stole it, and that's okay, because that's what we do. We take ideas that we love and then we make them our own. But is you even talked about doubting your doubts, right? Like, hey, it's okay to have doubts. It's okay to work through your doubts and to figure out why you have those doubts, but you can also doubt your doubts. And so ever since then, I've just loved the way that you think. And obviously it extends beyond just like that subject matter, that topic. But so just having you on and to chat with us, I think is going to be awesome. And so thanks for coming on. And then Jason is another friend. Jason has a bunch of letters after his name. He is currently studying for his PhD in counseling psychology. And this is his deal, man. He's a thinker. And so another person who I just love having conversations with you. I love when you text me random thoughts, about different things. And that's just, I thrive on that kind of stuff. And so I'm excited to kind of pick you guys' brain. But another reason that I picked both of you guys specifically is because of what you guys do. So obviously you're my friends. And so part of it is because of who you are. But part of it is even what you do. And as we're talking about, stories and uh, the importance of telling your story, the importance of listening to other people's stories. And I was thinking about who would be good people to have on the first episode as we dive into why this is even important. I thought, like, man, how about somebody who spends a bunch of time counseling? And so, well, pastors do that and counselors do that. And so I thought you guys would just be awesome guys to get on to just chat about this. So thank you guys so much for saying yes.
Hey man, thanks for inviting us.
For sure.
I appreciate
I
it.
appreciate your ram head. Um, so hey, let's do this. I got just a couple questions for you guys, and we'll kind of dive in here. And by all means, if you have questions or thoughts or anything that diverge, let's do it. Let's go for it. We've got some time. Kids are in bed. We're good to go here. But the first thing I wanted to ask is just for my own curiosity. When I told you kind of the pitch, right? Like what I was doing, I'm going to start this YouTube, what it's going to be about. Would you guys want to do the first episode with me? Like what made you say yes?
I'll let Jason answer first.
Thanks, Noah. Appreciate that. So I think for me, there's a lot of things I think about storytelling, obviously, because that's what I do for a living is get other people to tell their stories to me. But I think for me, it was more the experience of telling mine. So for me, a lot of the good things that happened in my life happened after I started telling mine. And a lot of the things that I have now, I probably wouldn't have otherwise had I not. And so I have found it in my own personal life to be profoundly healing, not only because I went through addiction and some other stuff, but I also found that it helps me to like envision what I want for the future and to actually get it.
All right, Noah, follow that up, man. Just kidding.
Yeah, everything that Jason said, except his story is probably way different than mine. But I'm here because you asked, and I like you. I'm here because Jason's really smart. So me being here automatically makes me more interesting and smarter than maybe I really am. So I'm part of it. This is great.
Yeah, this is great. They say if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room. So Jason, you're probably in the wrong room, but me and Noah are doing all right. That's awesome. Well, guys, I really do appreciate it. If you see me kind of looking off to the side here, it's because I have some notes, right here on the second screen. So it's not because I'm trying to, break eye contact or anything like that. But I want to kind of dive into some of these questions. And so the first thing is, well, we kind of talked a little bit about this before we jumped on, right? So we were talking a little bit beforehand, and I told you guys one of the things that really made me decide, like, you just need to go ahead and do the YouTube. You just need to jump on it. Like, don't let it be the thing that you think about and then throw away and then never actually do anything with. Was because as I was thinking about it and kind of debating, I had a conversation with a friend who was a friend that I've had for a long time, like years and years, probably somewhere between 8 and 10 years. So this isn't like I met him 2 years ago, even, this is a long time friend, had lots of conversations with, spent lots of time with, like late night in the car, in a parking lot, eating Taco Bell, like that kind of friend, you know what I mean? So this is a friend. And, we were having a conversation, and he just kind of nonchalantly, as if I already knew, like said something that happened in his past that I had no idea happened. And it was like a traumatic thing, but he was just kind of talking about like, yeah, and so that happened and that sucked. And so, and then I did this and then I was just like, I didn't make him go back, but in my mind, like, I was like, hold on, what did you just say? Like, what did you go through as a kid, And it just made me think like, here's this guy that I've known for years and years and years. And he's gone through this, and I had no idea. And it changes the way that it doesn't change the way I think about him, as in like it makes me think worse of him or anything like that, but it just makes me have a different respect for him, right? Because here you are, like living your life, trying to make things happen, trying to be productive and do good things, and you've got this thing that's just that you've had to work through, And so all of that just made me think about how much of our lives, even the people that are close to us, don't really know, but how impactful they could be if people did know. And so my first question to kick us off is is why do you think we're so good at leaving those things out? Like, why are we so good at, whether it's not sharing them ourselves? I know, Jason, you kind of talked about how when you started sharing some of your story, it started doing some things for you. But whether it's not sharing ourselves or whether it's like not listening, not listening to others, like, why are we so okay with just like, hey, bud, good to see you. Cool. Talk to you later, which I know it's cliche to pick on that, but like, why are we so good at that? What do you like? What do you guys think?
I'll let the doctor go.
I think I'm gonna let Noah go first on this one.
Oh boy.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of reasons. I think one would be, I think we don't like to think back on our story too much because we don't like to have to confront some of the painful memories or process through what did that do to me. I think another thing though is we live in a time period and culturally, especially in Western culture, where life seems to be moving so fast and so busy. So we like the idea of like, I think that there's like a level of like present day autonomy, meaning I don't think about life too much of where I came from because I just got to seize the day and I got to have a goal for tomorrow. And when I can live with that idea of like, I'm autonomous in the moment right now from my past, I just focus on today and the future. And because we don't take time and acknowledge it and think about it, it doesn't really give us a full narrative, I think, of our story, good or bad. But we just fill our life so much with present day things and like the things I want to go to, not thinking about the things that I've come from, and realizing that the things that I come from actually affect how I go to the things that I'm going to and how I'm currently living my life right now. So, I mean, I think there's a million answers. Jason probably has some really great insight in it, but I think one of the things that I've noticed in pastoring is that people get so caught up with what they want in life to happen or what they are striving for or working towards that they don't realize that sometimes a hindrance or maybe even a catalyst for where they're going is for them to take time and reflect on their story and where they've come from.
That's good. Jason, you want to respond to that, or you want to go off on your own?
Well, it's interesting to see that side of it, because what I tend to run into is people who will not, for the life of them, focus on the present. They're really caught up in what happened in the past, or they're so focused on what could happen in a negative way in the future that they can't get past that. And so it's interesting because I just have a different experience of it from the people that I work with, I think. And so I think when we're talking about like not sharing stuff from the past, especially traumatic stuff, there's just some things that happen to the way that our brain functions when we experience trauma, especially the younger that we are, that our brain really tries to protect us from that pain in a lot of ways. And one of the ways it does that is to really help us avoid it altogether. Right? It's too much and we can't manage it, especially for like kids, right? So when you tell the story about your friend, I'm picturing like one of two things really happening. Is either his brain has done such a good job of protecting him, he's disconnected from the experience, right? Or he's actually healed from it and it's no longer taking up such a large part of his life that he can move on while he's talking about it. And either one could really be true. I don't know. But ultimately, I see people really trying to hide from either hurt or guilt or shame. And the easiest way to do that is to keep everything on the surface.
Yeah. That's good. One thing that I think is cool, even about kind of what you just said, Jason, about how your experience is different than Noah's experience, right? Like your is, to me, it just speaks to how individuals deal with these things differently, right? For some of us, it's like, I'm not going to think about the past. I've got somewhere to get and I'm going to get there, and it doesn't matter what it takes. Like, I'm getting there. And there's other people where it's like, I can't think about tomorrow. I can't ever do that thing. Look at everything that happened, And so for some of us, it's like the catalyst to push us forward, but it pushes us forward almost like in an unhealthy way, right? If we don't actually like hold back and like look at why we're doing what we're doing. And then the opposite is true too, right? We can cripple ourselves and almost use it as like a crutch to hold us back from the things that really we could accomplish if we would kind of deal with those emotions. No, I remember one time several years ago, I had started reading. I had started setting reading goals. Like I hadn't read books since like high school, right? Outside of like what I needed to read for college. Um, and then so I hadn't read, and then all of a sudden I just like set this goal. I'm gonna start reading. I'm gonna start reading this many books every year, you know. And so I started doing that. And one time, me and you were meeting, and I was talking about some book that I was reading or something, and you were like, "Hey, why, why a book goal? Why are you setting that? Like, why do you want to read? Like, why are you reading? Just like, why is that the goal?" And like, never in a million years did I expect that question, because to me, I'm like, of course, like you just read, man. Like you just got to read, right? But after that, it like kind of shook me, because I was like, why is this important to me? Like, there was the obvious answer that I could like, you know, appease myself with, which is like, dude, a lot of people know a lot of things that I don't know, so I wanna read and know, and there's truth to that. But then there was the side of it of like well, I want to look smart, you know, and I want you know people to say like, wow, you've read that many books this year, like whatever. And so I had to deal with what in me is driving me to make this decision, to want this response out of people. And then then what do I do with that, right? And so that's even just like a really small example of what we're talking about. But it's like when you start talking to people about your life, people ask you questions that are uncomfortable, and you got to figure out what to do with those things, right? But I think it's a great thing to have happen, because you can kind of sort through the bull crap that you're feeding yourself, right? And then actually get to where you want to be. So, um, let me kind of move on to the next question here, because it does kind of tie in with some of what we were just talking about. But you started talking about. Sorry, I'm looking up at my questions again here. When we do look back, and we're looking at, and Jason, this even ties in again with kind of what you said earlier, even just about yourself. Like when you look back at your own story and you start sharing it, that there's kind of I'm going to be really general and just say there's something there. There's something that happens, you know, when you start to do that. When somebody starts to look at their life as a story, look back and tell their story, kind of dissect that. And I think there's something powerful about that, you know. And so I think part of the reason that you guys are here, and you kind of already articulated this, is that you agree with that. And so go into maybe if you had to say one thing, I guess that way it's not so broad, because kind of like Noah, what you said, you could say a million different things about this. But what's maybe one thing for you that, whether it's you sharing your story, whether it's your experience of other people sharing their story, that you think like, man, when you share your story, like this is one thing, you know, it doesn't have to be a million. You don't have to pick five, just like one thing that you think you're going to experience something along this line, and this is a good for you, you know?
So I think the thing for me when listening to other people's stories, I'll start with that, is that like as a therapist, it's my job to be empathetic. And like full disclosure, took the Clifton Strength Finder. Number 34 on my list was empathy. So not my strength, okay? Not a natural strength for me. Hi, I'm your therapist. I have no empathy. Hi. But the thing is, like when we hear other people tell their stories, it humanizes them for us in ways that just reading about them won't do, right? Or just seeing them on social media or whatever it is. It helps us gain empathy for them. So there's no like greater sense of empathy that you're going to gain than to listen to someone else's story. And that even goes for maybe people you don't like. If you really want to deal with like a place you're struggling with, people you don't like or people you disagree with, go spend some time with them and listen to their stories. It will change the way you think, I promise. And as far as like telling your own story, I think there are like a million avenues you could go here probably. But I think to me, it's so important how we tell our stories to ourselves. That's probably the most important thing. And that's where I see a lot of people suffering where they don't need to be, I think, more than anything else. And a lot of people are stuck or feel depressed or anxious. It's because the story that they're telling themselves about their lives or about the world or about other people is actually causing them to feel that way. And so for me, when I'm trying to listen to people's stories or when I'm telling my own, I always keep in mind that like somebody else is going to identify with that feeling, like the empathy piece. And it's also gives them like permission to then feel like they're not alone. I think that part's amazing to me.
Do you think that's one of the biggest? Sorry, no, if it's okay, I'm gonna dive in on that for just a second. Um, do you think that that last thing that you said right there is one of the bigger areas um, where people get it wrong about their own story? Is that it's like this is just me. I'm the only one who deals with it. Like, um,
Hmm.
I'm trying to remember what you said. I don't think you said they're lying about their own story. You said something like that though, that they're telling themselves something about their story that isn't true. Would you say that's one of the bigger things?
Yeah, so we kind of basically like our brains want a complete story, right? It doesn't want to leave it hanging. If you watch any like successful TV show, what do they do at the end of every
Right.
episode? They leave a cliffhanger for you that's really dramatic, right? And it's frustrating, but it makes you watch the next episode. It's really effective at doing that because we desire to have that catharsis, that end of the story. And so when we don't have it, our brain fills it in, and it'll fill it in with whatever we kind of believe at our core, not things that we like overtly state that we believe in, the things that we actually perceive to be true about the world on like a subconscious level. So, for instance, if you grew up in a house where people were abusive, or even if it was just like people put you down or didn't believe in you, you might develop the sense of like, I'm not good enough. And that's what you fill in the cracks of all the stories in your life. And then before you know it, you wind up with low self-esteem. You feel depressed. You don't understand why, like, you don't enjoy things that you used to, but it's because everywhere you go, you're filling in your story with I'm not good enough, I'm not lovable, I'm not capable, I'm not worthy.
Hmm. Um, yeah, I feel like I've definitely seen that. I feel like I've felt like I've done that myself, right? Like you just immediately it's easier to think that it's like easier to think that I can't do that than I can do that, you know. And I think at one point it's because there's a lot of things in our lives that we can't do at first, and you've got to kind of muddle through, right? You've got to like put some effort in to actually get there, and it's easier just to not, But that's a side note. Um, maybe I'm just speaking for myself. We'll just pretend that we'll just say that's just me, which is the lie that we tell ourselves. So
We're
yeah,
here for you, Chris.
this is
This is
actually
what we
just
do.
this
Yeah.
was just
Whatever you need.
my way to get a free therapy session with Jason. Just kidding, totally joking. But no, man, I'd love to hear from you on this too, though, because I feel like you've definitely got some experience here as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think I love what Jason said, right? Like hearing people's story humanizes them, regardless of how you feel about it. Like he even referenced people like maybe you don't like, and I couldn't help but think about a trial that's happening right now about somebody who all of us would see the story and think, what a despicable, evil human being. And now, but I'm following a journalist who's doing the backstory on this individual and saying this was their upbringing, this is what the family life was like, this is their interactions and relationships growing up. And again, doesn't excuse the evil that this person did, but it does humanize them in a way where it forces me, even as a pastor, because people think like as pastors, like you get it all together and you treat everybody right. But it forces me to have a heart of empathy, of like, man, again, not validating, and I think justice should be served, but it paints a much broader and truer picture of a person knowing that individual story, which then leaves them not as an object, but as a human being. Yeah. And I think not on the flip side, but another aspect in just thinking through that question, I think real wisdom comes from experience, like good or bad. Having lived through something gives me an ability to have learned from it. Like that was really good. That was maybe a healthy family. That was a healthy family of origin. That was a healthy way to handle that situation. Or if I am good at being self-reflective or honest with myself or have good assessment, that was not good. And that was what I don't want to pattern my behavior after or my life after or whatever it might be. So wisdom comes from experience, good or bad. I think that's important to note because I think there's a difference between wisdom and knowledge. And I think we live in a time right now where knowledge is so accessible, where anybody can jump on Google and get the answer to a question. The problem is that knowledge is often pedagogical, meaning like we learn it, whether it's in a classroom or again, it's an article that we read, and we think because I know this, then I really can like apply it or live it out or have it as a felt experience. And though there might be some truth to that, real wisdom comes through what I've actually experienced, not just what I know. So man, wisdom comes from, I've been married for 16 years with 3 kids, and I'm talking to a 22-year-old who just got married, and I'm like, hey, FYI, don't talk to your wife like that. And he's like, well, what do you know? I'm like, well, 16 years worth of 3 kids in, I got a little bit of wisdom. It's not just knowledge, it's like wisdom through experience. So I think there's value in wisdom and seeing that. And when you live through something, or even when you live in something, I think it does add a level of authenticity and authority to be able to speak to speak to it in a way that, and from a position that you just can't speak to it from if you haven't gone through it. And I think it's valuable to think about your story and say, okay, I've lived through this, and I've literally lived through it. Maybe I came through it. And that's not to say, and Jason can speak better to this than I could, it's not to say that just because you went through something, you now have authority to speak on it from a healthy perspective in a healthy way. But there is the fact that you've gone through it. So there's something in your epigenetics, even there's something in your DNA, your soul, that is there that we can unpack, refine, using Christian language, renew and restore for good and to use for where you're headed in the future. So that's a long answer, and I shotgunned a lot of stuff to talk about the value and the importance of the story.
I love it, man. I think too, like, I agree with both of you. Obviously, that's why you're here. I mean, I guess it's not obvious, but I knew that I would love.
I mean, you can disagree with me. I fight with it all the time.
No, I knew that I would love so much what you guys would say, and I would love to just deep dive into like all this stuff. But I don't want to keep you up all night. But one thing though, I feel like it's not really piggybacking. It's kind of taking what we're talking about and then even just another lane with it is, as you do like kind of unpack these things like we're talking about, right? So I've experienced this, I've lived through this. I'm looking back on it, I'm unpacking it, and now I'm going to articulate it to somebody else, right? So I'm actually going to share it. I feel like there's even something in that sharing part of it where, well, now it's a community exercise, right? It's not just what I think about it. And even like what I experienced, right? Because, somebody's going to punch me for this, but like, kind of like what you said, just because you came through something doesn't mean you're the expert on that thing, right? Well, lived truth isn't always the truth, right? Like, I can perceive something differently than it actually was. And there's a part where when I unpack my story and I share it with somebody, I'm opening the door for somebody to give me a new interpretation, right? And I'm opening the door. Like, I think there's something cool about, and this is kind of what we're going to be getting into, when you do hear somebody's story and kind of what you said, Noah, like, they lived through it. They might have actually like, hey man, I lived through it. Like, thank God, I got through it. And there's something when we hear that where we can go like, oh my gosh, they lived through it. And like, I'm going through this and they lived through it. So maybe I can live through it. But there's the other part where when somebody can go, well, like I lived through this, and then somebody else who, loves them and can speak with some wisdom, like you said, about, you've been married for this long, this many kids, and somebody's been married for 2 weeks, and they think they've got it all together. And you can go, well, did you ever maybe think about it from this angle? And now, because I've decided to share my story and I've opened it up to maybe somebody who's maybe got more wisdom than me, they can actually redirect me and they can help me frame my story in a way that's going to actually be beneficial instead of me getting hung up on things that are going to actually hurt in the long run. You know what I mean?
100%, for sure. Yeah.
Sorry, I guess that there was no question there. I was just riffing, so forgive me. I don't have letters after my name, so you can throw out anything that I just said.
Well, I mean, I will say this, and I'll swing it over again into kind of where I live, within the faith realm. Not that we don't all live there, but like as a pastor and like dealing with that, there's a verse in Revelation that's a go-to for a lot of people. Like, they overcame by the blood of the Lamb, or the work of Jesus, and the word of their testimony. So the power in their story. And so I think there's an aspect in power of the story of seeing the redeeming work of Jesus through your life. But I also think there's these moments where we find in the scriptures, especially in the book of First John, he uses this language of like, we tell you what we've seen and what we've heard. And when he says that, he means like when we've been with, for them, their perspective, what he's talking about is we've been with Jesus. So we've lived this experience. So what we're delivering to you is what we've seen and what we heard. And it creates a bridge. It creates an openness. And I think even what you're getting to, Chris, of like when somebody's lived through something and somebody else that's going through something has an opportunity to say, yeah, maybe can I ask you about that then? Like, what was it like? What was it to see that when you were going through it, or hear that, or feel that? What are the things you wish you could do differently? What are things that kept your sanity, And we don't give people an opportunity to ask those questions or find that hope, even if we don't share any of our story.
I love that. One of my questions that I was going to ask is like, what would you say to somebody who says, like, nobody wants to hear my story? And I feel like what you just said, like, I just want to copy and paste that at the end of that question because it's so good. Like even if somebody doesn't want to hear your story, somebody might need to hear your story, because of everything that you just said. But Jason, I'm sorry, man. Were you about to piggyback on something Noah said?
Yeah, actually on something that both of you just said, so I don't even know where to begin there. But I'll go with what you said, Chris, because I think the thing that popped up for me when you were just talking is like, people can use their stories in different ways, right? So I remember talking to someone, we're going to, I think it was the Dominican Republic mission trip, maybe. That's the right one. But we were down there and I heard this person's story. And I was like, wow, that sounds like it was a rough childhood. Like, it was the thing that came to me. But I could see that like this person was not using that story in a way that made their life better. They were taking all the things that happened and using them like bricks to basically like build a wall around themselves to protect them from the world, right? Which is what a lot of people do who have traumatic experiences or upbringings with people who are just not healthy. And so they take the things that happen and they build walls. But I think wisdom happens when you use it to build bridges instead. It's like make those connections with other people and with the world, because that's ultimately the thing that helps us heal.
Yeah, really good. All right, let me ask you this. So I feel like we've been hitting on this, and so some of this might be like, I'm just asking the same question with a slight, like, we're just turning it like slightly to this angle, right? But so we've been talking about sharing your story. So talking about listening to somebody else's story, right? So the whole, like, one of the whole ideas of this channel is even just like, I'm going to get on here and talk with people about their stories. And so most of the people who are going to be watching aren't going to know the people that I'm talking to, right? These aren't celebrities. These aren't, social media influencers, anything like that. They're just people that I know that I like, and so, so when you think about like, well, what am I going to get out of listening to that? Like, why should I listen to these people's stories? I guess my question for you guys would be like, if you had to answer that question, why is it important to listen to somebody's story? Even somebody, you could talk about maybe somebody that you are connected to. So let's just, ignore the whole YouTube channel, right? And just say like, in your life, maybe you should listen to more people's stories. But even this, like, is there value in jumping on and listening to somebody? I don't even know that person. Is there value there, or what kind of value is there, do you think? Rock, paper, scissors, go.
That's what I felt like. It was a stare down. So I think not only like gaining empathy for other people, but maybe recognizing we don't know everything. That's super important. As a person who really like is happy to know a lot of things myself, like I don't even remotely know close to half of what everything is. So it's helpful to me because I feel like I hear something new when I hear somebody's story, and I maybe see things from a different perspective, right? Because we only have our own perspectives to work from, and people see things in stories that I would never have even thought of, and I find that to be amazing at helping me like learn more, not just about like that person, but like people in general. And it helps me stay humble in a way that other things might not. So like just gaining knowledge, like Noah talked about earlier, that has never helped me stay humble, not once in my life. Um, However, like recognizing that other people, especially based on their experiences and what they've learned from them, can really grant you some wisdom or like help you understand values in a different way, even. I think that's really profoundly powerful from hearing from other people.
Yeah, I think everything that Jason just said, I would echo. I'd even like take what he kind of opened up with earlier and was talking about empathy and just referenced it again. I think there's an element of like you want to have empathy in your life with those that you're closest with. And then I think there's this, I don't know that it's the next step. And I don't know that I would have the right language. Jason actually might be able to clarify this a little bit better. But I think the end goal isn't always necessarily empathy, but I think it might be understanding. And it's not an understanding for even an agreement of like how you are the way you are, but now I have an understanding of how you are and why you are the way you are. And there's a level of understanding that one, if it's a close relationship, knowing their story gives me insight, right? Like we're in the time of the personality tests. Everybody loves to find out what their number is and their, you whatever the latest one that comes out, from Enneagram to Strengths Finder to your DISC to whatever it might be. And those are all great and those are fun. And the truth of the matter is most of the people that take them and like them is because it's one of the only times that they get to hear about themselves from an outside source. And then they read it and they're like, oh yeah, that is me. That is me. And it's like, yeah, but if you sat long enough with either yourself and process your own story, or have somebody, hopefully like you're saying, that could sit down and say, tell me about you, a lot of that information would come to the surface. Maybe you wouldn't have the language and the images and you would have a cool number with a cool wing attached to it or anything, but it would give you some insight to be able to be like, oh, that's how I am. And hearing other people's stories helps you, I think, process and unpack your own, because you're a summation of your story. Like your life is reflective of so much of what you've come through. And by sitting and stopping and listening to other people, one, there's empathy, another, there's understanding, but hopefully that mirror gets put back on you and you walk away from that time or that podcast or that conversation and say, all right, like what about in my life? Like even the book question that you said that I asked you a while ago, that question stems from a question I had to ask myself, which is a part of my story. Is like, Noah, why do you like to read so much? And part of it is because I wasn't a good student in school. Some of that was by choice because I hated homework. I thought if you have me here for 8 hours, what gives you the right to invade into my space afterwards for homework? So I just wouldn't do it. But there is an element now where I do look back and I think, I feel like there's probably something innately inside of me that wants to prove my intelligence to other people because I didn't prove it back then. And so I carry this struggle, maybe even a level of insecurity in my soul of like, man, I have to do this to show that I know what I'm talking about, or I have a level of intelligence that wasn't reflective. Back then I was just a skateboarding class clown kid, that people like, but wouldn't go to them for any kind of knowledge. That's for sure, so I see that small string that runs through that, but having that then is able to cause me to ask you your question, which obviously all those years ago has played of value in your life. You're welcome.
Yeah,
I'm glad
I
I could give
appreciate
it
that.
to you.
Yeah, I do. No, one thing, so if I could try to piece these things together a little bit, because we're talking about listening to somebody's story, right? And then one of the things that you just said, Noah, is listening to somebody else's story, helping you then to kind of unpack some of your own story. And Jason, you hit on it earlier as well. And then Noah, so going way back, you said, sometimes there are people, right, who they don't want to look back. They just are so focused on getting where they want to go, And so I feel like I'm trying to piece a lot of things together right now. So hopefully I'm being somewhat articulate, but well, if you've ever been in bed, right, you're trying to fall asleep and then you just can't stop thinking, right? Because like that's the one time that you actually just slow down and you're just alone with your thoughts you know, and that's if you don't sleep with your phone, you know, beside your bed and Instagram, you know. So like I have I stopped like 2 years ago sleeping with my phone beside my bed. I actually just use a real alarm clock like my parents did, you know, because I was like, dude, get this thing out of my hand. This is not healthy, right? But so I think when you're in that space and like that can be so hard because you don't ever do that. And so just thinking about kind of wrapping this up now into what we were just talking about, I think that sometimes we have a hard time viewing our lives as a story. Um, but kind of know what you said. When I get to hear somebody else's story and I get to, and especially somebody who's thought about it, like somebody who's taken the time to look back and piece the things together, even like what you just said, Noah, like something like that. Like I noticed this about myself when I was younger. And so I've noticed I was compensating for it now. And I see this string that runs through, right? Well, that comes from somebody who's taken the time to think about some of their life, right? And when you get to hear somebody who's done that, and then you see that there is a string, you know, like it's a story, it's a narrative. It's not just like isolated moments along a timeline. These things are connected, you know. I think that when you get to hear somebody else do that, then that starts giving you a kind of framework to even do it for yourself. Like if I've never heard somebody do that, if I've never heard somebody just like be vulnerable enough to say something like that about themselves, I don't even know that's possible, you know, because we don't think like that. We do think here and now and where I'm trying to get to and how I'm making the next buck, you know, because it's Western, you know, culture. Like I just want to be successful, you know, whatever. And so we just get there. And so when we get to hear somebody's story and hear how they have come from here and then they did this thing and then they had this catalyst moment and it changed the trajectory and then they got here and they thought that it was great and then they sucked again, you know, and we get to hear the whole thing, then it almost starts to make us go, okay, so so what does that look like in my life? You know, my details are different, but the framework is there, you know. I think there's something huge about that because I think if we don't do that, we never get that opportunity, then we do miss out on so much of what our story could be because we don't even put it in the context of a story. It's just like, well, this is just what happened, and so it's just what happened. I don't know. I guess what are your thoughts on that, Doctor? Almost Doctor.
Honestly, almost, yeah, almost doctor. Um, I think people honestly too, like when they hear other people's stories, that aspect of like not feeling alone is really important.
Mm-hmm.
Since the pandemic started, I cannot tell you how much marriage counseling I've
Mm.
done. So it's been quite a ride with that. People are just like lining up at this point for marriage counseling because they're spending more time together. And they had such busy lives, like we've talked about, like it's just like nonstop that they actually haven't spent a lot of time together. And then they were forced to all of a sudden.
Mm.
And then they recognized some of the problems that were happening that they didn't even notice, right? Because that wasn't the story that was going through their head. Honestly, they're just thinking about what all they have to do, and they were more doing logistics than they were spending time
Mm.
together. And so they come in and are like, "Why is this happening to us?" They all feel like we call it terminally unique.
Mm.
Like nobody can understand me because I'm so
Wow, what a
unique,
phrase!
and that's pretty much almost never true. So yeah, it's pretty profound, especially people who are depressed. Like this is a thing that happens. People think that no one can understand how they feel. There's also the power of group therapy. But then once you start doing a lot of marriage counseling with people, the thing you'll notice right away is almost all the couple problems are so similar that you might as well just get them together to talk
Mm.
about it. Like it's that similar. Like you all are going through the same thing. You're not communicating well, right? You came from two different families with two different sets of values. Even if they're similar, they're different. And so how do you reconcile that? How do you do parenting together? How do you do all these like things you have to do when you're married? And they don't recognize like every single married person goes through this. There's no exception to that unless you like are married from afar and never meet the person, right? And I don't know anybody like
Yeah,
that. So they might be terminally unique. Maybe that.
yeah, that's great. And so, and you see, yeah, and so what you're saying is right. Like hearing somebody else's story, you get to see like, oh, okay, them too. Okay, cool. So I can do this, you know.
Mhm.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Well, hey guys, I got one more question for you. I'm skipping some stuff here because you guys have been super gracious with your time, and I'm gonna let you get off of here. But I do want to ask one more thing, and then I'm gonna end with a quick quote out of a book that I'm reading right now. Noah, don't make fun of me for reading still. Just kidding. And then I'll let you guys go. But last question I have for you guys. We're talking about stories. We're talking about going back and dissecting our stories and um, how to apply that, right? How do I look? All these things. I feel like there's been so much good here. Like I want to go back and rewatch this 4 times so that I can, you know, be better at life. But if you are sitting across from somebody right now, right, or you could like stare into the face of somebody who's watching this video, you know, sometime in the unknown future on the interwebs, and they would tell you but my story sucks, and I'm like this is just what it is. Like it's not changing, it's not going anywhere. What would you tell that person? Like what would you tell them? Encourage them to do like whatever it might be. What would you tell that person?
I think a therapist should answer this question. Definitely. I mean, a solid, professionally trained counselor.
Oh man, no pressure there. Let me just speak for all therapists. No, I'm just kidding. I think really, like, people need to recognize, and I think this is something that therapy is really helpful with actually. Like, if you don't like your story, guess what? You're the narrator. You have the power to control what happens to some degree, right? You don't control everything, right? You don't control the hand you were dealt at the beginning. You don't control where you grew up. You don't control the people that started out in your life. But once you're an adult, you do. You do have control over what happens, and a lot more of it, and a lot more agency than you probably think you do. And so if you feel stuck, you should probably talk to the narrator, right? Take a look at what you're telling yourself about your problems. What's the story you're telling yourself? Because if you're telling yourself it's hopeless, well, that's probably going to be true, right? And you can re-author the future of your story. You have the opportunity to do that. And so, you know, if you don't like the script that you're reading right now, maybe you should sit down and take a look at it and think about some edits or a rewrite. Also, come to counseling.
Hey man, I'm all about it. I love it. That's awesome. Well, hey, let me read this quote to you guys real quick, and then we'll sign off, man. So this is actually, so as I was, it just happened that I started reading this book. It's called Beyond Order. It's by Jordan Peterson. Some people love him, some people hate him. But this quote just like smacked me in the face because it was actually after we had already planned this sit down, this conversation, and I just felt like it was so applicable to what we were talking about, and so I wrote it down, and I'll read it to you guys real quick. It says, "We need to talk about the past so we can distinguish the trivial, overblown concerns that otherwise plague our thoughts from the experiences that are truly important. We need to talk about the nature of the present and our plans for the future so we know where we are, where we're going, and why we are going there. We need to listen to ourselves as we talk as well, so that we may organize our otherwise inchoate bodily reactions, motivations, and emotions into something articulate and organized, and dispense with those concerns that are exaggerated and irrational. We need to talk, both to remember and to forget." And I love that, and I'm not even going to try to add to it. So just let that sit and resonate. But guys, thank you so much for jumping on. I appreciate it. And man, if you're watching right now, make sure you drop some love in the comments for Noah and Jason. And make sure that you subscribe, make sure that you share. Unless you hated it, then, you know, just forget that we exist. And so appreciate you guys, and we'll see you next time.